All right, I guess I'll do it. They must be busy. This is Lieutenant John Weinstein, Commander Weinstein from Northern Virginia Community College, Commander Strategic Planning and Outreach, officer from Northern Virginia Community College Police Department. And we are thankful that John agreed to do this session for us today online from the VCCA, for the VCCA. Okay, John, whenever you're ready.
Thanks. So it's nice to be back with you again. I guess for a couple of years I was doing presentations in person. This is not quite as good because I'm missing people like Teresa and Lana. But anyway, what I'd like to do is spend about 45 minutes to an hour going over what essentially are the principles of something called verbal judo. There was an individual, he was a PhD in psychology, and he decided he wanted to become a police officer. And in the process of becoming a cop, he realized that there were two basic kinds of officers. Officers who were adept at de-escalating difficult situations, and then there were officers who didn't have those skills and ended up resorting to violence and had complaints made against them. And so this individual wrote a book on what the secrets of successful communications are, and he called this book Verbal Judo because it recognizes that the most important and powerful weapons we possess as police officers is not guns and batons, rather it's our brains and our ability to communicate. And over the years, verbal judo has become popular in the civilian market. Now it's taught not just to police, but also to civilians. So about 10 years ago, I became a certified verbal judo instructor, and it's usually a 3 to 5 day course of instruction. But what I've done is I've consolidated the key principles, and I'm going to share those with you today. What's interesting is about 5 years ago, the provost of the Loudon campus at Nova came to me and said, I would like you to do a presentation for our faculty on dealing with difficult students. And I asked her, or I said to her, I can do that. But why do you want to limit it to students? Because sometimes we, the faculty and staff, we are the difficult people. So that's an important thing to recognize, that often we are the source of conflict, whether we realize it or not. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about why verbal skills are important. You all know this. But what I would like to do is start in a way I haven't done before when I've done this presentation for VCCA, and that is talk about mental health. About 3 years ago, long before COVID, I was at the Alexandria campus talking to the math and science faculty. There were about 80 people there, and I asked them how many of them had been trained or received any special training in dealing with people who are suffering mental health challenges. And out of 80 people, one person raised her hand. So where are we now? Well, obviously, everybody is pretty stressed out about the coronavirus, and it's been the cause of tremendous stress and psychological trauma. People, have been upset, obviously, with losing friends and loved ones. There's guilt, there's fear. They say that as many as 80,000 cancer diagnoses have been missed because people can't get into the hospitals. There's uncertainty, feelings of vulnerability. We've read about how separation of school children from their classroom settings, while it may be a good idea for health reasons, over the year had negative impacts on their social development. People are upset about the loss of control over their lives. Some people resent having to wear masks. There's been financial duress. People are feeling isolated. And even people have questioned their faith. Why would God ever let something like this happen? So the manifestations of this stress, we have seen increases in depression. We've seen increases in suicide and suicide attempts. Right now, suicide attempts are at an all-time high, to include the age group of 15 to 30, which for the most part make up the students in our institutions. We have seen tremendous increases in substance abuse and overdoses, insomnia, domestic violence. We're seeing increases in chronic health problems because either people can't get in to see their doctors, or there are many people who are afraid to find out what may be wrong with them. But we have seen with the coronavirus that other kinds of health problems have increased. If you want an appreciation of how much stress is out there, there was a 1,000% increase in hotline calls over the past year. 50% of Americans have said that COVID has worsened their mental health. And, I mentioned before about the suicide rate. Well, you see that coronavirus did have a significant impact on unemployment, and that suicide rates went up accordingly. So even before coronavirus, there had been an acknowledgement that mental health was getting out of control. If you go back to the early 60s and the Kennedy administration, there used to be over 600,000 hospital beds dedicated to mental health individuals in this country. But some of the mental health hospitals were so horrific, effectively, that the cure was worse than the disease. And so a move was made to get rid of these many hospital beds, and they decided that they would close down most of the big mental health hospitals, and instead they would fund a series of local walk-in outpatient clinics. Well, as it turns out, the hospitals got closed, but the clinics never opened. And we ended up going from 600,000 mental health dedicated hospital beds to a little over 100,000. So since there hasn't been a decline in the number of people with mental health challenges, in fact, I'd suggest that it's probably gotten worse. Where are these people? And I tell you, they're in our classrooms, they're on our campuses, they're at the Walmart. And so you can see here on this slide that even before coronavirus, there was a significant increase in mental health concerns. So I asked you, or I mentioned that the National Institute of Mental Health said that about 20% of all US adults live with some mental health or some mental illness. It may not be necessarily debilitating, but it does have an impact on their ability to communicate, their interactions on a day-to-day basis. And I don't know how many people are on this call right now, but if it's 20%, in all seriousness, there are probably a few of us on this call right now who have some kind of a mental health issue. Sadly, among adults, fewer than half ever receive any treatment. So what does that mean for colleges? Well, you can see the next bullet, where there was a survey done by Campus Safety Magazine that surveyed thousands and thousands of students, and 60% of the students surveyed said that they experienced overwhelming stress and anxiety, and 40% considered themselves too depressed to function. Yet, as you can see, even a smaller percentage of students receive any kind of professional care than the population at large. So what does that mean for us? Well, what it means is that everybody we meet, and maybe even ourselves, are under the influence. Now, if you consider, for instance, say, the analogy of a person who is under the influence of alcohol, that person doesn't drive well because driving is a task that requires a multiplicity of functions. And someone who's under the influence is unable to execute all of these functions needed to drive. Well, take a look at the manifestations of various mental illnesses. It doesn't mean that somebody suffering a mental illness necessarily exhibits all of these factors, but sensory overload. If you are an instructor, take a look at the first two bullets. Somebody who has sensory overload, somebody who's challenged by abstract thoughts. I mean, that puts these people behind the eight ball when it comes to learning. And the problem often is that we don't tend to think right off the bat, oh, this person has a mental illness. Instead, we might think this student is lazy. This student doesn't like me. This student is not serious about his education. And those may be true. But on the other hand, there may be a mental health issue. And the point is that if you assume automatically that this student is lazy or doesn't like you or doesn't care about your subject matter, that's going to propel you perhaps along one set of reactions. Whereas if you recognize that this student may have some mental health issues, it may propel you along a different set of reactions. But many people with mental health issues, they crave routine, they are frustrated. We've all met people who seem to be preoccupied with one idea and can never get beyond that one idea. People with mental health issues often have problems with problem solving. They have problems with memory. I mean, think about all these things and their impact on someone's ability to succeed in the classroom environment. They may be overly defensive. They may do things that you find distracting in your class, like rocking back and forth, or inability to sit still and getting up and walking around. And these oftentimes are manifestations of a mental health problem, not just that somebody is disrespecting you. So these manifestations, like I said, you may find in your classroom, you may find in your workplace, and indeed, you may exhibit some of these yourselves. So how do you deal with these people, with people who are upset? And, clearly the ideas on the left about establishing expectations and being calm and allowing people to vent and all of these things, these are pretty obvious. But what I would like to focus on is, you see on the right side, 3 bullets. It's saying employ the 3 E's. And this is the ultimate distillation of verbal judo. I mentioned before that the psychologist said, what are the characteristics of individuals who are able to prevent conflict from occurring, and de-escalating conflict that does occur? And he said there are 3 things. The most important is ego. And the reason is because if you make it about yourself, and this is not just dealing with mental health, I should say, let me back up a half a step and say that the 3 E's help you deal with people with mental health challenges, but it helps you deal with students, with your children, with your significant others, with your colleagues in the workplace. The 3 E's are ultimately the most important guidance that one can receive for effective communications. So let's talk about ego first. Ego focuses on us, and by focusing on us, it turns every interaction into a contest. And every contest has a winner and a loser. And so if your ego makes it about you, then the other individual is not going to want to be a loser. In other words, ego always generates conflict. The second thing is explanation. This is the information age. We may have the authority to tell people, I need you to do this, or no cell phones in class. We have the authority to make those rules. But this is the information age. People want information. They want to be respected. They want to be told why. So giving an explanation does take a little bit of time, but it's probably one of the 2 or 3 most important things you can do. And then empathy. There's a video I usually show when I give this presentation in person, but I didn't want to show a 5-minute video today. But it's, if you're interested in seeing kind of an entertaining video that is very instructive about how not to deal with somebody, Google the state of Maine State Trooper traffic stop. And you'll see a Maine State Trooper on his dash cam speaking to a speeder, and the speeder is just dropping F-bombs and calling him the most vulgar names, and the trooper never gets angry, he never raises his voice. And I ask people who watch it if they think that the trooper did a good job, and everybody uniformly says yes, because the trooper never lost his temper. But the trooper could have de-escalated the conflict, and he never did. For instance, the driver said, well, I was just out to get pills for my dog. And what the trooper could have said is, well, what kind of dog do you have? What's wrong with him? I have a dog. He's a great watchdog. He's very affectionate. He sits on my lap all the time. He's great with my children and my grandchildren. And even if I don't own a dog, what I have done is I have transformed this interaction from one between a cop, a person in authority, and a speeder, somebody in a position of subordination, to a conversation between 2 dog lovers. I've humanized myself. And empathy is one of the most important things that you can establish with another person. The problem is that in order to achieve empathy, you have to listen. And you have to subordinate, at least for some time, your ego. But let's go back to the importance of listening. Stephen Covey, the author of a well-known book entitled 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So think about your own interactions, and are you really, let's say you're speaking to somebody and they are talking about their political views and you don't agree with those views. Are you really listening to understand why that person believes what he or she believes and the assumptions, the intellectual basis? Or have you just kind of put the conversation on automatic pilot and you're waiting for that person to stop talking so you can tell him or her what you think? And so I would suggest to you, and there are many studies that have been conducted that show this, that we think we're listening, but oftentimes we're not. So ego control, explanation, empathy, listening. whether or not you're dealing with somebody with mental health. If you walk away with nothing else today, if you remember these 3 E's, you'll be far and away more capable of effective communications, both preventing conflict, but also de-escalating that which occurs. So let's transition away from mental health issues and just recognize that that is one component of factors that make people sometimes difficult to deal with, or us difficult to deal with. But let's talk about written or communications in general. Words, words are the currency of communication. The problem is that if I say something to you or you say something to me, words never tell the whole message. Words are affected by your culture, by frustration, by fear. I mean, how many times have you snapped at somebody because you were upset or because you were fearful of something? Sarcasm, tone, emphasis. Let me give you an example with emphasis. I'm going to give you a 7-word sentence, and I'm going to say that I was talking to my old friend, well, old as a friend in duration, not in age, Teresa Thomas. So I'm saying to Teresa the sentence, I didn't say you were stupid. So I'm going to say this sentence 3 ways, and I'm going to make it mean 3 different things based on what I emphasize. The first, I didn't say you were stupid. No, Lana Kennedy said you were stupid. Or I didn't say you were stupid. No, I was thinking it. Or I didn't say you were stupid. No, I said you're an ignoramus. So even if you use the same words, those words, the meaning of those words can vary significantly based on, what you emphasize, or if someone says, if someone says, hey, do I have permission to do such and such? And they say, yes, you do. Or maybe they'll say, yeah. Those are both permissions, but they mean very different things. So recognize that the words themselves don't necessarily always mean the same thing. And interestingly, I have a nice quote here from a French author, Francois Garagnon, who wrote a book entitled Jade and the Blessed Mysteries of Life. I've read the book. It's not all that great. But anyway, he has this great line in here, and I read it to you now. Between what I think I want to say, what I believe I'm saying, what I say, what you want to hear, what you believe you understand, and what you understood, there are at least 9 possibilities for misunderstanding. So recognize that you may think that you understand the person. You may think that what you said was clearly understandable, but the chance of misunderstanding is a lot more significant than you expect. Another thing, besides the fact that words don't necessarily tell the whole message, is there are all kinds of nonverbal cues that affect the message. I mean, consider, for instance, a police officer's uniform. If I walk into a meeting and I have coffee stains on my uniform, and maybe I haven't washed it in a while, and you can smell it, and my shoes aren't shined, what are you going to think about my professionalism, my attention to detail, my self-respect? So nonverbal cues all the time affect the message. If somebody is talking to me and I'm sitting here like this with my arms folded, Is that a nonverbal message? Obviously it is. Or if somebody's speaking to me and I start looking at my watch, does that mean that maybe I'm not as interested as that person might like me to be? So nonverbal cues all the time affect the message. And then, and this kind of goes back to the example I did before about emphasis. There's an interesting story in the book Verbal Judo where an officer recounts that he was working a fatal accident and he was working it by himself. And while he was working the accident, he was notified to go to a house that had been burglarized and take a report. Now, the burglary had already occurred and the burglar had left the house. So all he had to do was take the report and then turn it over the next day to the detectives. But after working this fatal accident, which you can imagine is pretty traumatic, he shows up about 2 hours later at the house where the burglary had occurred and been completed. And as soon as he knocks on the door, the victim of the burglary comes out and said, "It's about time you got there. Where the hell were you, you lazy SOB? You were probably eating donuts and drinking coffee." And he really laid into this cop. And what the cop said was, he said, "I realized that this guy wasn't angry at me, that he wasn't even speaking to me. His words said one thing, but what his words really meant was, I'm scared. I've never been through this situation before. I don't know how to get my property back. I feel violated. My house is no longer secure. My wife and children don't want to be in the house by themselves anymore." That's real fear and frustration. And that was speaking. And so it goes back to something I said earlier about controlling your ego, about not making it about yourself. If you just assume that, this guy is insulting me, you're going to react with anger. But if you realize that maybe there were reasons, other reasons for the words, and that these words don't necessarily reflect the true issue at hand, it makes somebody a lot more comfortable in not making it about themselves, about exploring what's really going on. So, we talk about nonverbal communications. Here's a great picture of former President Obama and President Vladimir Putin. When this picture came out, the statement was that Presidents Obama and Putin had a productive exchange of views. What does that picture tell us? It doesn't look like either of them want to be there. It doesn't look like anything productive happened. It doesn't look like there's any mutual respect or friendship or camaraderie between them. So, a picture does really say 1,000 words, and recognize that people can be saying things all the time, but they can have nonverbal communications that completely contradict the message. So you give a presentation and someone says, "Oh, that was a great presentation," but you notice that while you were giving the presentation, all they were doing was looking at their cell phone. So again, words don't necessarily tell you the entire message. Cultural differences, personal space. If you are a male interacting with a female, personal space is going to be important. I mean, women will stand closer to each other than they will a man. Personal space is influenced by status, by friendship. Consider an elevator. You walk into an elevator and someone is standing in the back left corner. You're not going to stand in the back left corner. You'll stand in the back right corner or the front right. I mean, if you ever really want to have fun with someone, go stand a half a foot away from them in the back of an elevator. I mean, personal space is important to us. Consider this. Who do you think demands more personal space? Somebody who was raised in New York City where people are always crowded. I mean, just think if you've ever ridden on the New York City subway at rush hour where people are packed in there belly to belly. Contrast somebody who was raised in New York City with somebody who was raised on a farm in Iowa whose nearest neighbor was 2 miles away. So different people, irrespective of their age, of their gender, of their social status, different people are going to demand different amounts of personal space. So, you may be standing too close to someone, or somebody may be standing within your comfort zone, and that is going to have a negative impact on the relationship. So, if you're interacting with somebody and that person, is backing up, there may be a space issue. Similarly, eye contact. I was born not long after World War II, and my father used to tell me, when you meet somebody, you look them in the eye and give them a firm handshake. Well, fast forward to becoming a cop and taking courses in how do you interview and interrogate individuals. And one of the things they teach us to do is you look for nonverbal signs that may indicate deception. And one of the things they used to say was that if you're speaking to somebody and they start avoiding eye contact with you, that may be a sign of deception. But what if the person is from Japan or Korea, where culturally making eye contact with somebody in a position of authority is considered to be rude and disrespectful? So if I am speaking to somebody and they won't look at me, I may conclude that they are lying to me, or that at a minimum that they are disrespecting me, whereas they aren't being motivated by deception or disrespect. They are trying to show me a certain amount of courtesy and respect. So eye contact means different things to different people, and you know what eye contact means to you, but ask yourself, what does eye contact mean to the other individual? Touch. This is another important thing. If you've seen the movie Gran Torino, which is a great movie, for those of you who haven't seen it, Clint Eastwood plays an incredibly racist individual who's resentful that his community is being taken over by people from Asia, and he has all kinds of nasty comments about them. But in the course of the movie, he becomes very close to them, and at one point, he's invited to a party, and while he's at the party, he does something typically American. A little boy goes running by, and as a sign of affection, Clint Eastwood pats him on the head. And everybody at the party recoils in shock. And Clint Eastwood is told, you never touch a person on the head. We believe that's where the spirit resides. Now, is there any way that Clint Eastwood could know all the cultural idiosyncrasies of his Asian neighbors? And there's no way he could. But consider my situation here at Nova. We have 180 different nationalities here at the college. Is there any way that I, as a police officer, or Donna Minish as an instructor here, is there any way that we can be familiar with the cultural idiosyncrasies of 180 different people, or not 180 different nationalities? And the answer is clearly no. But if we're having a conversation and the conversation is going badly, you have to ask yourself, am I crowding this person? Am I making eye contact when I shouldn't? Have I touched somebody, who considers it to be forward or an affront? We all know that in the Middle East, a man does not touch a woman who is not either related by birth or by marriage. It's just not something you do. So all of these things can suggest, if a conversation is going badly, that there may be a cultural issue. Hand gestures, the same thing. Back in the day when I was a kid, Chevrolet used to have a motto for their used car lots, A-OK. And we do this all the time, this or you give somebody a thumbs up. But in other countries, these are considered incredibly vulgar. If you're sitting in your office with your feet up on your desk, you may just be relaxing. But somebody comes in of a certain culture and sees you showing them the bottoms of your feet, and now you have just insulted this individual. So being aware of hand gestures, of eye contact, personal space, touching, these are all important components of interaction. One last thing I'll mention is time. So as a junior in college, I studied for a year in Colombia, South America. And it used to drive me crazy because, again, my father, who taught me about giving firm handshakes and looking people in the eye, his motto was, it's better to be 2 hours early than 2 minutes late. And I've always been this way. I believe that time is our most precious resource. And I'm not going to waste somebody else's time by showing up late, and I don't expect them to waste my time. This is a very American characteristic, although I'll say that my wife hasn't quite mastered timeliness yet, but that's another matter. But when I was in South America, all the time I was frustrated because I'd make an appointment to be somewhere or have somebody meet me at, say, 10 o'clock, and that would be 10:15, 10:30, and the person hadn't shown up yet. And it took me a long time to realize that if I'm talking to Lana Kennedy and it's 5 minutes to 10, and I say to Lana, I'm sorry, I have an appointment with Donna at 10 o'clock. I need to leave. We can continue this later. Lana's going to understand that. But if Lana's from Colombia, what Lana is going to assume is that I think that my meeting with Donna is more important than my meeting with Lana. So again, recognize that not everybody shares our sense of punctuality, where I see this all the time. And back in the day before I was a cop, when I was teaching at a university, if I started a presentation or a class and somebody walked in 10 minutes late, it pissed me off. Oftentimes I wouldn't even let the student come into class. Now, of course, this was the late 70s. So we're talking over 40 years ago. But again, my behavior was predicated on the fact that I thought that this student wasn't serious about my class, that this student was disrespecting me. It never occurred to me that perhaps that student came from a different culture and didn't view time the same way I do. That's not to say that that student's view of time is right or mine is right. It's just that we view things differently, and consolidating, synchronizing behavior when people have different values and different perspectives is pretty difficult. So I said before that people might be under the influence of mental health issues, um, but we're all under the influence, even if it's not a mental health issue. Um, you just got a bad job performance appraisal, or your students gave you a lousy assessment at the end of the year, or your wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, or your child was just kicked out of school, or your brother just broke his leg, or whatever it is. Your car is making strange noises, and you only have one car, and you don't know if you have the money or the time to get it fixed, and you're afraid of being stranded on the side of the road. I said before, words are affected. They are filtered through frustration, fear, concern about other things. So if other people are under the influence, if the drunk driver makes bad choices because he is under the influence, are you always going to make good decisions or present yourself in the best way possible when you're under the influence, when you're under stress? Another thing is, we tend to think, and I've heard cops say this a million times, I'm going to give that person an attitude adjustment. Well, I can tell you it's taken me over 50 years to learn this, but it's like trying to teach a pig how to sing. It wastes your time and it annoys the pig. It is arrogant to think that we can change other people based on, a quick interaction that we have with them. If you've seen the movies, either Cool Hand Luke or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in each of those movies, whether it was Paul Newman or Jack Nicholson, somebody was trying to change their attitudes to get them to comply. And ultimately, they were unsuccessful. So let me move on. I see that I'm starting to run out of time. Just a couple of more points I'd like to make. We do not appear to others the way we perceive ourselves. I'll give you an example, and I don't know if there are any math majors in this group, but I'm going to prove to you right now that 2 is equal to 6. So if I am talking with Teresa, there were 3 Johns and there were 3 Teresas. Now, Donna walking up and seeing Teresa and me having a conversation might say, oh, there are only 2 people talking, but no, there's 6 of us. There are 3 Johns and 3 Teresas. The first John is the real John, the John who was born in New Jersey, in the 1950s, who went to Catholic school, who went to college, who studied abroad, who got married, who had a passel of kids, and now has a bunch of grandchildren, who went to graduate school, who became a cop, all the things who make me who I am. That's the real John. Then the second John is the John thinks he is. Handsome, debonair, great public speaker, super cop, irresistible to women, small pets love me. And then there's a third John, the Teresa that she sees when I pull her over for a traffic stop. And that's fat, old, racist, donut-eating cop. And there are 3 Teresas. There's the real Teresa, the Teresa thinks she is, great math instructor. And then there's the Teresa I see when I pull her over on that traffic stop. Damn lawbreaker. So the question is, which 2 of these 6 different people are the most important in a conversation? And I tell you that it depends on who's in a position of authority. If it's my traffic stop, I'm in a position of authority, the 2 people who are likely to become the most important are the John thinks he is, the great guy, and the Teresa perceived by John, the lawbreaker. If it's Teresa's class and she's the instructor and she's in the position of authority. It's going to be, you know, Teresa, the great instructor, great colleague, intellectual giant, and the me as perceived by Teresa, you know, fat old guy. So I always tell our officers, when you're interacting with somebody, make sure you know which of the three yous is doing the speaking, and be mindful of which of the three thems you're speaking to. Because think about this, with Teresa at this traffic stop, do you think that there's a big gap between the Teresa thinks she is and the Teresa that I see? And there is. And that gap is called profiling, and it always works out badly. So just remember, and especially Teresa being the math whiz that she is, that 2 equals 6, and that it's just a reminder that other people don't see us the way we see ourselves. So how can you deal with all of these things? You know, we've talked about the things that make communications difficult, whether it's that words don't mean what we think they do, or that people can be easily misunderstood, or everybody's under the influence, or mental health, or nonverbal, or cultural things. All of these things make communication difficult. So what can you do? Well, I've already mentioned 2 of these things. One is listening. Listen with the intent to understand, not with the intent to reply. Second is giving out information, giving explanations. It's a sign of respect. It's also a means that you can enhance understanding. Again, I tell you, you have the right to order somebody to do something, but it never works. Give them an explanation, build consensus. Here is one of the other key things, maybe the most important. We are only representatives. It's not about us. Control your ego, because your ego will allow your feelings and beliefs to cloud the issue, to get in the way of conversation. And again, ego turns every interaction into a contest, and nobody wants to be the loser. Another recommendation is understand your own triggers. Normally, when I show this briefing in person, I have this great Three Stooges video that I like to show. And I should say, by the way, that if any of you want the actual copies of these slides, I guess Donna can send them out, or if not, my address is on the cover slide. Hit me up and I will send you these slides. But in the Three Stooges video, it's their old Niagara Falls routine, where every time Mo hears the word Niagara Falls, it makes him go crazy and beat the hell out of Curly. And you know, the whole episode is that Curly keeps inadvertently mentioning Niagara Falls, and he keeps getting beaten up by Mo. Well, we all have our triggers. And you know that when you're arguing with somebody, what's the first thing they're going to try to do? They're going to try to push your buttons, because if they can figure out what your triggers are, they put you on the defensive, and they seize control of the interaction. So, you know, I've been a cop for a long time, but if somebody walks up to me and says, "Oh, you're just a college cop, you're not a real cop," that's going to make me pretty angry. Or, you know, let's say that I read once years ago that being a college instructor was one of the most prestigious jobs in the United States. So you're at a party, someone says, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" "Oh, I'm a college instructor." "Oh, where do you teach?" "Oh, I teach at Nova." "Nova? That's just the 13th grade. These kinds of things will push our buttons. And if you know what your buttons are, then when someone tries to push them, you are not going to react in a defensive or in an angry way. But you have to know what your buttons are. There are some things you should never say. And I know that there's not one person on this Zoom call who has not said at least 3 times every day the first. You know, you tell somebody to calm down, and we say it all the time, and we mean well, right? What we're saying is we're trying to get you to calm down so that we can communicate more effectively. But think about this. You're taking somebody who is upset and you are telling that person that he or she has a behavioral problem. How do you think that's going to work out? So it's kind of like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Don't do that. There are all kinds of hidden messages. And I'm not saying that we use these words explicitly the way they are written down, but if your messages you wouldn't understand, then your hidden message is that you're stupid. Or, you know, I said before, you need to give explanations. But if somebody says, well, why can't I bring a cell phone into my class? And you say, because those are the rules. What you're conveying is that you are not open to discussion. You are not open to a meeting of the minds or trying to understand that somebody may have specific mitigating circumstances why they need their phone in class. What about it's none of your business? The hidden message there is you're an outsider. My personal favorite on this list is I'm not going to say this again. Now, you all know that if you have kids, you will say it again and again and again many times. The problem is that you tell your kids, I'm not going to say this again, and after the 5th time, they continue their behavior, and then you snap and you punish them. Well, how did the kids know that they could only do it 5 times and that the 6th was the time they were going to get in trouble? So we say this all the time. I'm not going to say this again. And that threat makes us sound hollow and that we don't have the courage or the conviction or the wherewithal to follow up on something. These are some things that you can always say, but I direct your attention to the 5th and the 6th. In the heat of battle, or sometimes if you're interacting with someone, maybe you'll see that you've upset them, or maybe you've said the wrong thing. You've said something because you were under the influence and you ended up turning that person off or making that person angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, that didn't come out right. Let me start again. Or I'm sorry that I said such and such. The reason I said it was I thought such and such, was the case. But, recognize that oftentimes apologizing or starting over again humanizes us, and it may be inconsistent with the authority we want people to feel we hold, but in some ways, being more human and showing a more flexible self is more important to effective communication. Now, I want to just very quickly go over this. You know what? I'm not going to do it because I know that all of you are great drivers and no one ever gets stopped. But when you look at these slides, if you'll take a look on the right, you can see that the way police officers are being trained now is to give people an explanation, to give people a chance to talk and to listen to what they say. And this is much more amenable to good police-citizen interactions, excuse me, than on the left where you're essentially playing stump the chump. with a motorist. Excuse me. A lot of times you will ask somebody to do something, whether in a class or in a setting, a work setting, and you ask them to do something and they refuse. Now, there is a way of trying to work through this. It used to be until this past July that if I walked up to you on a traffic citation and gave you a ticket and you refused to sign it, I was authorized to take you into custody and take you before a magistrate. So there used to be cops who would say, ma'am, I need you to sign this summons. And if they say no, then the first question was, do you want to go to jail? And this iterative process that you see right now, you ask somebody to do the right thing. If they say no, I'll use the ticket. Or let's use a cell phone in class. You have on your syllabus no cell phones in class. Some student whips out a cell phone and you say, hey, Billy, I'd like to ask you to put the cell phone away. And if he does, great. If he doesn't, Billy, the reason I'm asking you to put the cell phone away is because I find it distracting. Other students find it distracting as well, and it undermines the education process. We have a test coming up, and I think you'd be better off if you put the cell phone away. So you appeal to a reason, but you give an explanation. If Billy still doesn't put the cell phone away, well, Billy, you have options. If you put the cell phone away, I can continue with the lecture. If there are any questions, people can ask, and it puts the whole class in a much better situation. But if you refuse to put the cell phone away, then there's another set of options. Because of the distraction, I'm going to cancel class. Or I may be calling campus security, or I'm going to report you to the dean of students or disciplinary procedure. You don't want that. I don't want that. What do you say you work with me and put the cell phone away? If he still doesn't put the cell phone away, then you say, Billy, is there anything I can get you to do to put that cell phone away? I like to think there is. And if he still doesn't put the cell phone away, then you're not going to say it again and again and again. You're going to say, okay, class is over today. Billy, I'm reporting you to student discipline or whatever the action is. But this is a much more systematic way of trying to achieve consensus. Now, you can be the best verbal judo practitioner in the entire world, but that doesn't mean that it will always work. Sometimes you'll see people who are so angry that their face is flush red, or as my kids used to say, the daddy vein pops right out of the middle of my forehead, or somebody becomes very loud, or their voice becomes very soft, or they start to breathe quicker, or you see them balling their hands up in a fist, or they start pointing and they start collapsing your personal space. Maybe you smell alcohol or drugs. I mean, all of these things, these are the nonverbals in many instances that I was telling you can give you a truer appreciation of the situation. So you can be very good at verbal judo. You can practice the 3 E's: ego, explanation, and empathy. And you can listen, you can apologize, but sometimes you have an individual who, for lack of a better phrase, won't be persuaded. They want to fight or they want to argue. And so, never be complacent. You always have to protect yourself. So in summary, recognize that we may be in positions of authority, but we can't lead unless other people follow. And that requires us to moderate our ego, to understand our weaknesses, to watch our voice, to empathize, to explain, to understand culture, nonverbals, recognize that sometimes the behavior may be generated by mental health issues, and not disrespect. Again, if you assume that this person's disrespecting me, you've just let your ego get in the way, right? So, and the final thing I would say is have fun, enjoy the challenge of dealing with difficult people. I mean, it's the spice of life. And ultimately, this is where we want to be, where everybody holds hands and understands each other all the time and sing Kumbaya together. So if there are, I'm going to remove the screen. Are there any questions or any comments? I really haven't had a chance to read the chats because I was too busy boring you with my presentation, but are there any comments or questions or concerns? I do have, by the way, this is probably a hell of a time to tell you this, but I do have a one-page handout that summarizes everything I said. And I will send that to Donna and ask Donna to forward it to everybody. But if you would like this presentation given at your school or, at a public venue, feel free to give me a buzz and I'll see what I can do for you. So, subject to any questions or anger or obscenities you may have for me, that pretty much is everything I need to say. And thank you very much for attending, and I hope that this has been helpful for you.
John, would you please send out a copy of the slides as well as the one pager?
Yes, I will send them both. To. Well, I don't have a group email, so I'll send it to Donna and Donna, if you would forward it to everybody. Is that convenient, or is there somebody else you would rather have me send the slides and the one pager to?
I think, John, this is Susan Simmons.
Okay, right.
If you would send it back to Teresa. Do you have Teresa's email?
Oh yeah, Teresa and I go way back. Yeah, I'm happy.
Okay. All
I'll
right.
send it to her.
So if you'd send it to her, we'll make it available on our website, on the VCCA website, and
Okay.
Whoever wants it can go on there and get it at any time.
Okay, I will be happy to do that.
And I looked at the questions, and the chat, and that was basically all. Everybody was saying, yeah, they'd like a copy of the slides. So.
Okay, I'm happy to provide.
All right. Anybody have any questions? Okay, if not, well, thank you so much, John. It was good to see you, and very interesting presentation, and hopefully we'll get to see you next year sometime.
I hope so. That would be wonderful.
That would be. All right. Thank you. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Please remember, join the VCCA and go to the VCCA page and become a member. So we'll see you.